The mountain road was supposed to be scenic. It wasn't. Not when a $120,000 German sedan coughed, sputtered, and died halfway between nowhere and somewhere on a Tuesday afternoon. Richard Whitmore slammed the steering wheel, his face turning red as the car rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder. His wife, Claire, fanned herself with a brochure from the nearby lakeside resort. The engine hissed like it was mocking them. "Fantastic," Richard muttered. "Brand new, and the thing's already falling apart." Claire didn't look up. "Maybe it's the altitude," she said flatly. "Or maybe you shouldn't have refused the premium roadside service." "Don't start," he snapped, yanking his phone from the dashboard. No signal. He jabbed it again as if stubbornness could conjure a cell tower. "No bars, perfect, just perfect." Claire sighed dramatically, her gold bracelet catching the sun. "This is why we fly. Driving is for people who have time to waste." A faint rumble grew in the distance, the deep, steady growl of a truck engine. They both turned as a faded red tow truck rounded the bend. It slowed beside them, brakes squealing softly. On the door, white letters spelled Wilson Auto Service, Esterimer 1989. The driver stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, late 40s maybe. His coveralls were clean but old, hands stained with grease, the kind of permanent marks that don't wash out. His name patch read Caleb. He tipped his cap politely. "Afternoon, folks. Looks like you've got a bit of trouble." Richard's expression tightened. He was a man used to being helped by concierges, not mechanics with oil under their nails. "Yeah," he said curtly. "Engine died. It's a European model. Probably too sophisticated for—" He stopped short, but the meaning hung in the air. Caleb didn't flinch. "Well, let's take a look and see what she's telling us." Claire leaned toward Richard, whispering, "Can't we call for a proper service?" "This doesn't look very official." Richard forced a smile. "It's fine. Let's get it towed. Then we'll find a proper dealer in the city." Caleb crouched beside the hood, his eyes scanning the grill, the radiator, the faint trail of smoke that drifted like a ghost into the air. He reached in, touched a line, then sniffed the oil. His brow furrowed just slightly. He'd smelled this kind of burn before, the heavy metallic tang mixed with something faintly sweet. He couldn't place it yet, but it tugged at a memory he didn't expect to find out here. "Oil line burst," he said finally. "Could be from a bad seal or pressure buildup." "Nothing I can't fix. My shop's just 5 miles up the road." Richard frowned. 5 miles? Is it certified?" Caleb stood slowly, wiping his hands. "Certified, licensed, insured, and standing for 30 years. Wilson Auto's been fixing engines before that car brand even existed, sir." Claire folded her arms, looking unconvinced. 5 miles is too far out of our way," Richard grunted, glancing up at the sun. "Well, we don't have much of a choice, do we?" Caleb nodded once. "I can tow you in, get you sorted by evening if the part's standard. If not, I'll order overnight." He began hooking the sedan to the tow. Claire muttered under her breath, "Of course, the one time we go somewhere rural." When the car was secured, Caleb gestured toward the truck's cab. "You can ride up front if you'd like." Richard hesitated. "Isn't there an Uber or—" "No service this far," Caleb replied evenly. "But I'll get you there safe." There was something in his tone. Quiet authority, no arrogance, no need to prove anything. Claire exchanged a reluctant glance with her husband. Then, with visible reluctance, she climbed in. The seat creaked under her as if offended by her perfume. As they rolled down the winding road, the tension thickened. Richard kept checking his watch. Claire stared pointedly out the window, away from Caleb. He turned the radio dial. A soft voice came through the local station. "And today's fallen heroes are remembered. Private Ethan Whitmore, U.S. Army." Caleb's hand froze on the dial. The name. He blinked, the sound of the announcer echoing faintly in his chest. He glanced into the rearview mirror. Richard was staring at his phone. Claire was dabbing her lipstick. Neither reacted. Caleb said nothing, turning the volume down gently. The old pain that flickered through him was quiet, but alive. When they reached the small-town edge, the sign for Wilson Auto Service appeared. A whitewashed garage, 2 bays, an old gas pump out front, an American flag hanging faded but proud from the roofline. Claire frowned. "This is it?" Caleb parked neatly, lowering the tow. "Yes, ma'am." "It'll do the job." The car settled with a groan. Richard stepped out, surveying the place as though inspecting a barn. "You sure you can handle this kind of vehicle?" "It's not common." Caleb just smiled faintly. "Neither are most of the people I work with, sir." Inside, the shop smelled like warm oil and sawdust. Honest work. A small radio played faintly in the corner. A photo board hung on the wall, black and white pictures of soldiers beside engines, a few yellowed letters, and one newspaper clipping about local veteran opens family auto shop. Claire looked uncomfortable, brushing a speck of dust from her blouse. "How long will this take?" she asked. "Depends what I find once I open her up," Caleb replied. "Could be quick, could be stubborn." "Fine," Richard said briskly. "We'll wait in town." "You can leave it with me," Caleb said, jotting something on a clipboard. "I'll call you once I know what's wrong." Richard handed him a business card instead of cash. "Bill this number." "My assistant will handle payment." Caleb took the card silently. On it, embossed gold letters, Whitmore Industries. He looked at it for a beat longer than necessary, then simply nodded. "Yes, sir." As they turned to go, the radio crackled again. "In today's Remembrance segment, we honor those who gave their lives for their country. Private Ethan Whitmore, beloved son and friend." Caleb's hand paused mid-pen. The name again, clearer now. He turned toward the open garage door, just in time to see Richard and Claire stepping into the sunlight, getting into their rental SUV. He stood frozen, the sound of their laughter faint as the car pulled away down the dusty road. He whispered to himself, almost afraid of the words, "Ethan Whitmore. Can't be the same one." But in his gut, he already knew. The bell above the door chimed as Richard and Claire stepped back into the small-town cafe across from Wilson Auto. Everything about the place seemed too ordinary for them. The kind of diner that smelled of bacon, old wood, and hot coffee poured by the same waitress for 30 years. Claire wrinkled her nose. "Do they not have air conditioning here?" "It's a diner, Claire." "Not the Four Seasons," Richard muttered, sliding into a booth. His phone was still searching for signal. Unbelievable. "This entire place is a dead zone." A middle-aged waitress approached, pencil poised above her notepad. Her smile was polite but tired. "Afternoon. What can I get y'all?" Claire didn't bother looking up. "Do you have oat milk?" The woman blinked. "We've got whole, 2% or none at all, hon," Claire sighed dramatically. "Just water, then." "Bottled, if possible?" "Tap's good here," the waitress said with a small smile, and walked away before Claire could object. Richard leaned back, shaking his head. "I swear, the moment we get back to the city, I'm trading that car in." "German engineering, Maybe if you didn't drive it like you were in a race," Claire began. But her words trailed off as she noticed something through the window. Across the street, Caleb was kneeling beside the hood of their car, tools in hand. His movements were calm, deliberate, the kind of rhythm that comes from years of repetition. Sunlight caught on the old dog tags around his neck, glinting like a small secret he didn't mean to show. Claire scoffed. "Honestly, look at that. Bare hands, no gloves. He's going to scratch the paint." Richard followed her gaze, frowning. You'd think with a place like that, they'd have proper equipment. "He probably fixes tractors and lawnmowers," she said. "That car's wasted on him." They laughed, quietly at first, then louder, until the waitress returned with their drinks, looking unimpressed. Back across the street, Caleb wiped his hands and opened the engine casing. His face hardened as he examined the damage. A blown seal, sure, but the workmanship inside told him something else. A cheap, unapproved aftermarket part. Whoever sold this car had cut corners and hid it behind a luxury name. He took a photo for his records, then gently lowered the hood. He'd seen too many rich folks overpay for machines built on shortcuts. From the radio inside the shop, the same local station played softly again. The voice of the announcer steady, familiar. Private Ethan Whitmore, remembered for his courage during Operation Iron Shield. His bravery saved 3 men that day, one of whom credits Ethan with giving him a second chance at life. Caleb froze. The wrench slipped from his hand, clattering on the floor. That day, that operation. He could still feel the heat, smell the smoke, hear the shouts over the chaos. He remembered the voice that shouted through the dust. "Go! I'll cover you!" He remembered dragging himself to safety, clutching a dog tag that wasn't his. And now, that same last name, Whitmore, belonged to the man who had just sneered at him for touching his car. His chest tightened. He looked again at the sedan, gleaming, polished, immaculate, the kind of perfection money could buy. And he wondered if they even remembered the man who'd died saving strangers. By late afternoon, Caleb had finished the diagnostics. He wiped his hands, then crossed the street to the cafe, the repair report tucked in his pocket. The bell jingled as he stepped inside. The laughter stopped. Richard looked up, annoyance flashing across his face. "Well, did you figure it out?" Caleb nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. It wasn't an engine fault. Someone replaced your oil line with an aftermarket part, cheaper, weaker. That's what caused the blowout." Richard frowned. "Impossible. This car came straight from the dealership. I'm afraid not. I've seen this kind of swap before. Usually happens before delivery. Dealership cuts corners, customer pays the price." Claire's tone turned sharp. "Are you implying we were scammed?" Caleb met her eyes, his voice steady. "I'm saying whoever sold you this car didn't respect what you paid for," Richard huffed. "You think you know better than certified engineers?" "I don't think, sir," Caleb said softly. "I know." The room went quiet for a beat too long. The only sound was the faint buzz of the ceiling fan. Then Claire gave a dry laugh. "You're confident, I'll give you that." Caleb ignored the insult. "I can replace the line and flush the system. You'll be good to go by tonight." "Fine," Richard said. "Just make sure it's perfect. I don't want to end up stranded again." As Caleb turned to leave, Richard added under his breath, "Man's probably never touched a European car before." Caleb paused mid-step, not because of the words, but because of the tone. The same tone he'd heard too many times, polished superiority disguised as casual indifference. He turned his head slightly. "You'd be surprised what kind of engines I've worked on, sir," Richard smirked. "Oh, I doubt that." For a moment their eyes met, a lifetime of difference between them. Then Caleb nodded once, quietly, and walked out. As the door closed, Claire leaned closer to her husband. "I don't like this place. It's uncomfortable." Richard checked his watch. "We'll be out of here by dinner." "I'll make sure of it." But outside, Caleb stood in the fading sunlight, the radio still murmuring softly from the open garage door. Private Ethan Whitmore, survived by his parents, Richard and Claire Whitmore of Atlanta. The pen fell from Caleb's hand. The air left his lungs. He turned slowly toward their car, the one with the dealership's luxury emblem shining on the hood, and whispered, "So it is them." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old, scratched dog tag he'd carried for 12 years. The one he'd promised to return someday, the one that said Whitmore. Ethan J., U.S. Army. Caleb closed his fist around it, eyes stinging. "Guess the Lord wasn't done writing this story yet," he murmured. The clouds were already gathering when Caleb stepped back into the shop. Thunder rolled far off, slow and steady, the kind that promised an evening storm. He set the dog tag on his workbench and stared at it for a long time. The metal had dulled over the years, but the engraving was still clear. Ethan J. Whitmore, the young man who never made it home. The last time Caleb saw him, there was blood in the sand and fire in the air. Ethan had been half his age, quick with a smile, always talking about home. About parents who thought he'd gone into finance instead of service. He'd laughed then, saying, "They'll forgive me when I bring them back a medal." He never got that chance. Now the parents who once bragged about their wealth sat across the street, unaware that the man fixing their car had been there when their son took his last breath. Caleb took a deep breath and tucked the tag into his pocket. He had work to do. Emotions could wait. He replaced the faulty oil line, flushed the system, and tested the engine. It purred back to life, smooth and steady. Still, his hands trembled. Not from fatigue, but from the weight of what he knew. He had imagined this moment 100 ways. Mailing the dog tags, maybe calling them, maybe visiting their city house and delivering it in person. But never like this. Never after being mocked by the very people their son had died trying to protect. As he wiped the hood clean, a car pulled up. Sheriff Brody Kent's cruiser. The sheriff stepped out, hat tilted, eyes kind but sharp. "Heard you got yourself some city folks today," he said, nodding toward the cafe. Caleb gave a quiet chuckle. "You could say that." Brody leaned on the hood. "They give you trouble?" Caleb hesitated. "Nothing I can't handle." The sheriff studied him for a moment. "You've had that look before. Back when you came home from overseas." "What's on your mind?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he reached into his pocket and held up the dog tag. Brody's face changed. That from your unit?" "Yeah," Caleb said softly. "Ethan Whitmore. Good kid. Saved my life in Kandahar. I carried this ever since. Just figured I'd find a way to return it someday." Brody glanced toward the cafe window where Richard and Claire were still seated, now arguing quietly about something unseen. "You're kidding," the sheriff muttered. "That's them?" Caleb nodded once. "Didn't know till the radio said his name." For a long moment, Brody said nothing. The rain began to fall, light at first, then harder. He finally spoke, voice low. "You gonna tell them?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "They don't seem like the kind that listen." "Maybe not," Brody said, "but truth has a funny way of finding its own voice." Caleb gave a faint smile. "Maybe I'll let it speak for itself." Inside the cafe, Claire stirred her coffee impatiently as rain streaked down the window. "I told you," she said. "This was a mistake. You should have called for a tow. These small-town places, they're never professional." Richard was scrolling through his phone, trying to find a signal. "Well, I didn't see you volunteering to walk 5 miles in heels to get help." "Don't you use that tone with me," Claire snapped. "I'm tired, I'm cold, and this mechanic has taken long enough." At that moment, Caleb stepped in, holding their keys. "Your car's ready," he said, calm as ever. "Run smooth now. No charge for diagnostics." Richard reached for his wallet. "I'll pay cash." "No need," Caleb replied. "Just doing what's right." Claire frowned. "That's not how business works." Caleb's eyes held hers for a moment, steady, unreadable. "Sometimes it is." Richard placed a crisp bill on the table anyway. "Take it. I insist." Caleb didn't move to take it. "Keep your money. You'll need it more than I do." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Caleb didn't answer. He simply pulled something from his pocket and placed it on the table. A single scratched dog tag. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Claire reached out slowly, fingers trembling. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping before her voice found strength. "Ethan." The diner seemed to fall silent around them. Even the hum of the old refrigerator faded. Richard stared at the tag as if it might vanish if he blinked. "Where did you get this?" Caleb's voice was low. "Afghanistan. Kandahar province. Your son saved my life." Richard looked up sharply. You knew him?" Caleb nodded. "He was brave. Never hesitated. Talked about you both all the time." Claire's hand covered her mouth. He never told us he enlisted." "I figured," Caleb said gently. "He said he didn't want to worry you." Her eyes filled. "We thought he was traveling. Said he got a security job abroad." Caleb let the silence stretch. Then he said softly, "He was a good man. Deserved better than what he got." The emotion in the room shifted, heavy, fragile, real. But before they could speak again, the sheriff stepped in, hat dripping from the rain. "Sorry to interrupt," Brody said quietly, "but there's something you both need to see." He handed Richard a weathered file, retrieved from an old federal report. "That missing soldier report you filed? It wasn't closed properly. There's evidence his death wasn't recorded right. Richard blinked, confused. What are you saying? Brody's eyes met Caleb's. That maybe your son didn't die in vain. Maybe he uncovered something he wasn't supposed to. Claire's breath caught. What kind of something? Brody didn't answer directly. He just said, "You'll want to hear what's on that tape." Outside, thunder cracked across the valley. Inside, Caleb's quiet eyes held a promise. He hadn't come just to fix their car. He'd come to return what their son died protecting, and maybe to finish what Ethan started. The rain didn't let up that evening. It came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the diner's roof until every word seemed to echo in its rhythm. Richard and Claire sat frozen, staring at the folder the sheriff had placed before them. Caleb leaned against the counter, silent, his face unreadable beneath the flickering light. Brody Kent took off his hat, set it on the counter, and said quietly, "That file came through a joint task review this week. Routine follow-up, but something inside it didn't match the official record." Richard's voice trembled slightly. "We buried our son. The military told us his remains were found." "They told you a lot," Brody interrupted gently. "Not all of it true." He opened the folder and slid out a thin, silver flash drive sealed in plastic. A printed label read only, "Audio file 09-17-2013, unauthorized transmission." Caleb's stomach turned. He'd heard that date before. It was the day everything went wrong, the ambush that took Ethan's life. Brody continued, "We sent it up the chain. They said it was corrupted. But when we ran it locally—" He hesitated, looking toward Caleb. The voice was clear. Claire's hand went to her chest. "You mean—" Brody nodded. "Your son." The air in the room shifted. The waitress froze mid-step, a coffee pot in her hand. Even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to stop humming. Brody plugged a small recorder into the flash drive and pressed play. At first, only static. Then a voice broke through, grainy, distant, but unmistakably young and steady. "This is Corporal Ethan Whitmore. If anyone finds this, it means the mission went bad. We were told we were securing data, classified intel from a local contractor. But it's not enemy files. It's corporate, U.S. tech, private. Someone's making deals through the base, and if this gets buried, good men die for profit." The sound of gunfire echoed faintly through the transmission. Caleb's heart pounded. He remembered the night, the explosion, the screaming, Ethan yelling at him to run. "If I don't make it, tell my folks I didn't die for nothing. Tell them I tried to do the right thing." Then silence. A click. End of file. Claire broke first. Her sob cut through the room like glass. Richard's eyes glistened. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Caleb looked down, gripping the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. "He recorded that moments before—" He couldn't finish. Brody cleared his throat, voice low. "We traced the data tag Ethan mentioned. It connects to a defense supplier, Whitmore Industries." Both parents looked up at once, Richard's face drained of color. That's my company." Claire blinked, stunned. "Your company?" He swallowed hard. I thought those contracts were clean. We handled logistics, data storage. I never saw any reports from—" Brody's eyes narrowed slightly. "You sure about that, Mr. Whitmore?" Richard's hands trembled. "I swear it." "I had no idea." Caleb's voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Maybe your son did." For a long time, no one spoke. The rain outside softened to a steady hiss. Finally, Claire whispered, "All this time, we blamed the army, the war, when it was right under our roof." Brody nodded grimly. "We'll be reopening the case. But this—" He tapped the drive. "This changes everything." Richard slumped in his chair. "He must have found something." "Something that got him killed?" Caleb said nothing. He was staring through the window, lost in memory. When Ethan had fallen, Caleb had grabbed his vest, seen a flash drive tucked in the pocket, marked with the same company name. He'd buried it in the desert that night, thinking it was safer forgotten. Now, the past had come calling. Brody turned to him. "You remember anything else from that day?" Caleb hesitated. "Only that Ethan told me not to trust anyone with a badge." Brody looked away, jaw tight. Then we need to move carefully. If what he found connects to corporate defense money, someone's going to want this silenced again. Claire reached for the tag still on the table, holding it close. He tried to protect people. And we mocked the man he saved. Caleb shook his head softly. You didn't know. Her voice cracked. That doesn't make it right. The storm passed, leaving only the drip of water from the awning and the faint smell of wet asphalt. Brody packed up the recorder. I'll send this up to federal investigators, but quietly. No one else hears it until we know who's involved. He looked at Caleb. You've done enough for one lifetime, son, but I might need your help again before this ends. Caleb gave a quiet nod. You know where to find me. That night, Caleb sat alone in his garage. The lights were dim, the old clock ticking softly above his workbench. The dog tag lay beside a dusty frame, a photo of his unit. Ethan was there, smiling, sunlight bouncing off his helmet. Caleb's reflection stared back from the glass. Older, wearier but alive because of that boy. He whispered into the silence. You did good, kid. I'll finish it. As he reached to turn off the light, he didn't notice the shadow that moved outside the window. A dark car idled by the curb. Inside, a figure lifted a phone to his ear and murmured, He knows. Then the car rolled slowly away into the night. The rain had stopped, but the night still hummed with that strange electricity that follows a storm. Heavy, waiting, watchful. Caleb sat in his small house on the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls creak when the wind shifts. His dog, Ranger, lay curled at his feet, ears twitching at every faint sound. He hadn't slept since the diner, the flash drive, the voice recording, the Whitmores' stunned faces. They replayed in his mind like an old film reel he couldn't shut off. He'd tried to push the thoughts away by working. The hood of an old Ford sat open in front of him, but his hands just hung there, the wrench still and heavy. Can't fix the past, can we, boy? He muttered to Ranger. The dog thumped his tail once, a dull comfort in the empty space. Then, headlights swept across the wall. Caleb frowned, glancing at the clock. 12:43 a.m. Nobody came out this far at night. He stepped quietly to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to peek through. A black sedan was parked across the road. Engine off, no lights, no movement. Caleb's jaw clenched. He turned off his shop lamp, letting darkness swallow the room. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the car door opened, slow, deliberate. A man stepped out wearing a long coat, his face hidden under the brim of a hat. He didn't come up the driveway. He just stood there looking toward the house. Caleb's military instincts kicked in. Years had dulled nothing. He slipped his hand beneath the workbench, feeling for the cold metal of the revolver locked beneath. He didn't take it out, not yet. Ranger lifted his head, growling low. The man raised his hand, holding something small and rectangular. A phone. A text buzzed on Caleb's own screen almost immediately. Unknown number. You should have stayed quiet. Caleb's pulse thudded once. Slow. Deep dangerous. By the time he looked back outside, the sedan was gone. Just tire tracks glistening in the moonlight. The next morning, the diner opened as usual. Chloe, the young manager, wiped down the counter and tried to act like she hadn't heard the gossip. Everyone in town was talking. About the Whitmores' visit. About Caleb. About the soldier who knew something. It was small-town wildfire, spreading fast. Fed by half-truths and rumor. When Richard Whitmore came in around noon, heads turned. He looked older than before, unshaven, tired, carrying a weight no wealth could lift. He didn't sit at the fancy booths near the window. He went straight to the counter, where Caleb was fixing the old coffee machine. "Morning," Caleb said without looking up. "Morning," Richard replied, his voice cautious. "Mind if I sit?" Caleb shrugged. Free country. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of steaming water. Richard finally spoke. "I'd wanted to thank you for what you did for my son." Caleb stopped, turned slowly. His eyes were calm but distant. "You don't owe me thanks." "Yes, I do." Richard's voice cracked a little. "You were with him at the end. You heard that recording. You know he wasn't a traitor. He was trying to fix something I helped create." Caleb's jaw tightened. You didn't pull the trigger. No, Richard said quietly. But I built the world where someone did. That line landed heavy. The kind that silences an entire room without raising a voice. Even Chloe, pretending to refill napkin holders, froze mid-step. Before Caleb could answer, the diner door swung open. A man in a gray suit stepped inside. Too neat, too polished for a town like theirs. His shoes were clean, despite the wet streets. He walked up to the counter with a calm smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Whitmore," he greeted smoothly. "Didn't expect to find you here." Richard's face paled. "Harris, what are you doing in Aspen Ridge?" Caleb watched the exchange closely. Harris, the name was familiar. Ethan had mentioned him once during deployment. "The liaison from home base." Harris turned to Caleb, extending a hand. "You must be Mr. Cole, the mechanic." Caleb didn't move. "That's me. I hear you were a friend of Ethan's. More like brothers." Harris's smile flickered. "Then you'll understand why I'm here. We've been reviewing some sensitive materials. That audio recording, it was never meant for public release. I'll need you to hand it over." Caleb's expression didn't change. "You'll need a warrant," Harris chuckled softly. "You're a civilian now, Mr. Cole. This is national security. Not a court case." "Then get the sheriff." "Oh, I already did," Harris replied, his tone turning colder. "But Sheriff Kent's been relieved of duty. I think you'll find I'm the only authority that matters right now." The diner went quiet. The few customers remaining pretended to sip coffee, eyes darting. Richard stood, stepping between them. "Harris, this man risked his life for my son. If you think I'll let you threaten him..." Harris leaned closer. "Richard, you're the last person who should talk about integrity. You built the system Ethan tried to expose. That hit its mark." Caleb finally spoke, voice low and level. "You can leave now." Harris smiled again, but this time it looked like a warning. "Careful, soldier. Some ghosts are better left buried." He turned and walked out, leaving behind a chill that lingered long after the door swung shut. That night, Caleb sat on his porch again, watching the road. The town looked peaceful, but he knew better. He pulled Ethan's dog tag from his pocket, turning it over in his hand. There, faint but still visible, was an engraving he'd never noticed before. A series of numbers, coordinates. He typed them into his old GPS unit and froze. They pointed to a location deep in the woods, about 15 miles out of town, right where Ethan's unit had made camp on their final mission. Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. "What the hell were you hiding, kid?" Ranger lifted his head, ears perked. Outside, far down the road, a pair of headlights appeared again. Slow, deliberate, moving toward his house. Caleb stood, hand brushing the revolver holstered at his side. The quiet town of Aspen Ridge was about to learn that some wars don't end when the fighting stops. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of dawn that made every shadow look like a secret. Caleb stood by his truck, staring down at the GPS still glowing faintly from the night before. The coordinates blinked steady on the screen. 34.1611, 3.2347, a stretch of forest outside town that hadn't seen a hiker in years. He tossed a thermos of coffee into the cab, whistled for Ranger, and started the engine. The old Ford rumbled to life, familiar, loyal, louder than it should be. The drive was quiet. Pines lined both sides of the road, their tips fading into the fog. Every mile, Caleb replayed the diner scene in his head. Harris's words, Richard's guilt, Ethan's voice from the recording. By the time he reached the old forest gate, the sky had begun to clear, pale sunlight cutting through mist like truth through lies. He parked the truck and walked the rest of the way. The ground was soft from last night's rain, and the deeper he went, the quieter it became. No birds, no wind, just the sound of his boots sinking into mud. Ranger trotted ahead, then suddenly stopped, ears sharp, body rigid. Caleb followed his gaze. A faint glint of metal peeked through the underbrush. He knelt, brushed away leaves, and froze. It was an old military supply crate, half-buried, rusted at the corners but still sealed shut. The same kind their unit used overseas, and burned faintly into the side. E. Whitmore, Bravo unit. Caleb's heart kicked hard. His hands shook as he unlatched the side clasps. Inside, instead of weapons or rations, there were documents, files, photos, a small notebook wrapped in plastic. He opened the notebook first. The first page bore Ethan's handwriting. Sharp, urgent. If you're reading this, I didn't make it. The deal wasn't about weapons. It was about people. They're selling data, soldiers' medical info, brain scans from testing programs to private labs. My father doesn't know, or maybe he does. Caleb, if I vanish, tell my family the truth. Don't let them bury it with me. Caleb's breath caught. He turned the page. There were photos, military research facilities, lab signatures, shipment receipts with Whitmore Defense Systems stamped on top, and one blurry image of men loading containers marked human trial material. He whispered, "Oh, Ethan." Then, the snap of a branch. Caleb spun around. Through the trees, a figure was watching. Same gray coat as last night. Harris. Their eyes locked. "Found what you were looking for?" Harris called out, voice smooth, taunting. Caleb said nothing, slipping the notebook into his jacket. Harris took a slow step forward. "You think you're the first man who tried to play hero?" Ethan thought the same thing. "Look where that got him." Caleb's grip tightened around his revolver, though he didn't raise it yet. "You killed him." "Not me," Harris said, smiling faintly. "But I made the call that got him killed. Clean-up order. Necessary." Caleb's stomach turned, rage burning low and quiet. "You ever wonder," Harris continued, "why he sent you that message? Why you?" Caleb frowned. "He trusted you," Harris said. "But he didn't know who you really are. That you signed one of the early consent forms for that same program." The words hit like a punch. "You're lying," Harris chuckled. "Am I? You think your migraines, your blackout spells, were from combat? No, you were one of the first. You were data. You were property." Caleb's mind spun. Flashes of hospital lights, lost hours after missions, the unexplainable headaches. "You're a ghost, Caleb," Harris said softly. "And ghosts don't win." A single gunshot split the silence, not from Caleb, from somewhere deeper in the woods. Harris ducked, cursing, retreating toward the car trail. Caleb dropped behind a log, pulling Ranger close. 2 more shots rang out, then nothing but echo. When Caleb looked again, Harris was gone. Only the forest remained, still indifferent. Holding too many secrets, he climbed back into his truck, shaking, blood still pounding in his ears. He laid the notebook on the passenger seat. On the last page, Ethan had scribbled one final message. "Dad's not the villain, but he's the key. There's a vault under the old facility. Coldwater. That's where everything is. Don't trust anyone with a badge." Caleb started the truck. "Then we're going to Coldwater." Ranger barked once, as if agreeing. The road ahead twisted through mountains and fog, but Caleb didn't look back. Because now, the fight wasn't just for Ethan, it was for everyone who never knew they were being used. The drive to Coldwater took 2 hours, most of it along cracked asphalt that hadn't seen fresh paint in years. No signs, no streetlights, just endless pine and fog. Caleb gripped the steering wheel tighter as he passed the last mile marker. Ranger sat alert in the passenger seat, head tilted, sensing the change in his master's breathing. "Almost there, boy," Caleb murmured. His voice carried that mix of exhaustion and purpose. The sound of a man who'd lost too much to turn back. Now the facility appeared out of nowhere, a hulking concrete structure carved into the base of a mountain, its faded government seal barely visible under moss and time. The chain-link fence hung twisted, as though someone, or something, had forced its way through long ago. He killed the engine, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped out. The silence was heavy. No birds, no hum of insects, just the steady drip of water from a cracked pipe somewhere inside. The main entrance was locked, but a side door hung off its hinges. He slipped through. Inside, The air smelled of rust and chemical dust. Old computers sat in rows, covered in plastic. Empty monitors reflected the beam of his flashlight like unblinking eyes. Filing cabinets lay overturned, papers scattered across the floor. Charts. DNA sequences, names of soldiers he recognized. Then, a voice echoed faintly through the hall. "You shouldn't have come here, Caleb." He froze. It wasn't Harris. It was Richard Whitmore, the CEO, Ethan's father. He stepped from the shadows. No guards, no arrogance. Just a tired man in a gray coat holding an envelope in one hand. The same envelope from the diner. Caleb's flashlight shook slightly as he said, "You knew." Richard nodded slowly. "Not all of it. Not at first. But I knew my company was being used for something bigger. They called it Project Sentinel. Said it was for national security. Said it would save soldiers' lives. They didn't mention they were experimenting on them." Caleb's throat tightened. Ethan found out. Richard's eyes lowered. He tried to stop it. "He came here just like you. But by then, Harris had taken over the operation. My son never left this place." The words hung there. Simple. Devastating. Caleb took a step closer. "So why are you here now?" "To end it," Richard said, holding out the envelope. "Everything you need, the proof, files, recordings. But once you open this, there's no turning back. The men behind this aren't the kind that resign. They erase." Caleb took the envelope. His hands felt cold. "Why give it to me?" he asked quietly. Richard looked at him, not with pity, but with understanding. "Because Ethan trusted you more than he trusted me. He said if he didn't make it, you'd finish what he started." A faint noise cut through the moment. Metallic, rhythmic. Footsteps. Richard's eyes widened. "He's here." Harris stepped into the light, gun drawn, smirk fixed in place. "Touching reunion," he said. "But I can't let you walk out with that." Caleb's hand hovered near his holster. "You killed Ethan. You tried to bury him." Harris shrugged. "Collateral damage. You of all people should understand. Some wars never end. They just change their names." He raised the gun. Before the shot rang, Ranger lunged, teeth flashing, growling like thunder. Harris stumbled, firing wildly. The shot ricocheted off a steel beam, grazing Caleb's arm, but he didn't stop. He charged forward, slamming Harris into the wall. They fought, brutal, close, desperate. The flashlight spun on the ground, throwing sharp beams across the floor. Caleb landed a heavy blow, knocking Harris's gun loose. It slid across the concrete, stopping at Richard's feet. Richard picked it up, hands trembling. For a long second, no one moved. Then Harris laughed, breathless. "You won't do it. You've already lost one son to this. You won't kill me too." Richard's face hardened. He whispered, "No, but I can stop another father from losing his." He fired. The echo rolled down the corridor like thunder. Harris fell, shock frozen in his eyes. Caleb exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against his bleeding arm. Richard lowered the gun, his hands shaking. Silence again, heavy, final. Then Caleb opened the envelope. Inside, a flash drive, labeled simply EW Truth. By the time they stepped outside, dawn had broken, pale light spilling over the mountains. Richard handed Caleb his car keys. "Get this to someone who'll make it count. The Bureau won't listen to me, but they might listen to a soldier." Caleb nodded, pocketing the drive. "What about you?" Richard looked back at the building, smoke rising faintly from inside. "I'll handle the rest." Caleb knew what that meant, the kind of redemption a man finds only once. He turned, climbed into his truck, and drove. The road behind him glowed orange as the facility went up in flames. Ranger howled once, low, mournful. By the time Caleb reached the small town of Crestfield, the sun had climbed high, painting everything in harsh daylight, too bright for the kind of secrets he carried. His old truck groaned up the hill, pulling into the parking lot of a local radio station, WCRS 91.5. The voice of the valley. The building looked harmless enough. Peeling paint. A flickering neon on-air sign. But to Caleb, it felt like the last bridge between silence and truth. He cut the engine and sat there a moment, breathing, his arm bandaged with a strip of his own shirt. Ranger whined softly from the passenger seat, nudging Caleb's shoulder. "I know, boy," Caleb murmured, voice hoarse. "Once this is out, there's no going back." He stepped out, walked up the cracked steps, and pushed through the glass door. Inside, a young man with headphones looked up from the console. We're not open for guests right now, sir." Caleb held up his military ID. "You are now." The man blinked, unsure whether to argue or salute. "Yes, sir." "Studio B's open. You need to go live?" Caleb nodded once. "Right now." Inside Studio B, the room smelled faintly of coffee and static. He plugged the flash drive into the console, the label EW Truth, catching the light. "Can you patch this through?" he asked. The engineer swallowed hard. "It'll go out across the county. Maybe statewide if we push the relay?" "Do it," Caleb said. "And don't cut it, no matter what happens." He leaned toward the mic. "This is Sergeant Caleb Warren, U.S. Army retired. I don't expect you to know my name, but you should know what's been done in yours." The sound engineer's eyes widened as the broadcast light flickered red. Caleb's voice filled the airwaves. Firm, measured, the kind that carried decades of duty. "I served this country. I buried brothers in foreign soil. I believed our flag stood for truth, until I learned that some men were using it to hide their crimes." He paused, letting silence draw breath. 3 years ago, a young soldier named Ethan Whitmore discovered that his father's defense company, Whitmore Systems, was funneling money into a covert project called Sentinel. It wasn't for defense. It was for control, for profit, and when he tried to expose it, they made him disappear. Caleb's voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "They said he died overseas. That was a lie. He was killed right here in this state, by men wearing badges and titles. And I have proof." He nodded to the engineer, who hesitated, then hit play. The studio filled with static, then a voice, young, earnest, familiar. Ethan Whitmore's voice. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. My name is Ethan Whitmore, and I've uncovered evidence that Project Sentinel is operating under false pretenses. The data you're about to hear shows how our soldiers, our own men, were used in untested field simulations. Some of them never came back, including my unit, including my friend Caleb Warren." Caleb's jaw tightened. His eyes glistened. The tape continued, Ethan naming officials, referencing dates, describing experiments masked as adaptive stress drills. Then came a name that made every listener in their car. Living room, or kitchen freeze. Deputy Director Marcus Harris authorized these operations. Sheriff Brody Kent protected the local transfers. And my father, Richard Whitmore, funded it. The room went silent again. Even the static seemed to hold its breath. Phones began to ring at the radio station within minutes. The local sheriff's office, the press, even Washington, all demanding to know what was happening in Crestfield. But the broadcast didn't stop. The engineer looked up, panicked. "Sir, we're getting calls from federal lines. They're saying to shut it down." Caleb's eyes hardened. "Don't! This isn't theirs to stop anymore." He pressed the mic again. "To anyone listening, if you served, if you lost someone, if you were told to stay quiet, this is your truth too. Don't let them bury it again." Then he unplugged the flash drive, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out. Outside, the air was alive. People were emerging from shops, staring at radios in disbelief. At the diner across the street, an elderly couple sat frozen, tears streaking their faces as Ethan's voice played through the static of an old tabletop radio. Caleb climbed into his truck. He didn't look back, but before he drove off, his phone buzzed. "A message. No number, just words. It's out. You did it." He didn't know if Richard Whitmore had made it out of cold water alive. But he knew this. Ethan's voice had finally been heard. He looked over at Ranger. "We ain't done yet, boy, but at least now. The truth ain't ours alone." The truck pulled onto the open road, heading east, toward the horizon, toward whatever reckoning waited next. The fallout came faster than anyone could have predicted. By nightfall, the story had leapt from a small-town radio station to every major news network in America. The headlines blazed across screens. Veteran exposes covert defense program. Evidence ties to Whitmore systems. Leaked recording reveals cover-up in soldier's death. And with those headlines came chaos. Markets shook. Stock in Whitmore systems plummeted overnight. Federal investigators swarmed into Crestfield like a tide. Unmarked cars, camera crews, questions no one wanted to answer. Caleb watched it unfold from his truck parked on a bluff overlooking the valley. The glow of the town below looked small now, insignificant against the storm it had unleashed. He should have felt vindicated. But all he felt was tired. Back in Washington, a very different storm was brewing. Inside the marble halls of the Capitol, whispers turned into shouting matches. Congressional aides ran memos between offices like soldiers under fire. By morning, Richard Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Systems, was placed under federal investigation. His accounts were frozen. His mansion, the same one where Caleb had once been turned away, was now crawling with agents. He stood on his balcony as the sun rose, phone in hand, ashen-faced. His wife, Evelyn, trembled beside him. "They're saying Ethan's file was real," she whispered. Everything he said, all of it, Richard swallowed hard. "I told them to stop the program when he went missing." "I thought they did." Evelyn's eyes were wet, but sharp. "You didn't think." "You looked away, and now the whole world knows." She turned and walked back inside. For the first time in his powerful life, Richard Whitmore felt utterly powerless. Meanwhile, in Crestfield, the town had become a magnet for reporters. Cameras filled the diner where Caleb had first been mocked days ago. The same booths where laughter had once echoed were now stages for statements and apologies. Chloe, the waitress, saw him come in and froze, coffee pot in hand. You're the guy from the radio," she said softly. "The one who played that recording," Caleb nodded. "Just a man doing what should have been done a long time ago." She poured his coffee silently, her eyes glistening. "My brother served," she said. "I lost him in Afghanistan. They told me it was classified. Now I wonder what that really meant." Caleb looked at her, and for a moment, no words were needed. They were two people bound by the same ache, the same betrayal. Outside, black SUVs began to roll into town again, not the same ones that had come to intimidate. But now marked FBI and DOJ SAC Rossi stepped out, flanked by two agents, the same ones who'd brought down Sheriff Kent weeks before. She spotted Caleb and walked over, extending a hand. "Sergeant Warren," she said evenly. "You've stirred up quite a hornet's nest." Caleb shook her hand. "I didn't come for a war, ma'am." "Just the truth," Rossi nodded. "Well, you got both. The DOJ wants to debrief you. Your recording has already been verified. But you should know." She paused, glancing at the horizon. Richard Whitmore confessed. "Said he funded Sentinel, but claims he didn't authorize any human trials." Caleb's jaw tensed. "That's not what his boy's file says." "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." She studied him for a moment, then softened. "You did good, Warren. Most men would have buried that drive and disappeared." He looked past her, toward the diner window where locals watched in silence. "I buried enough brothers already," he said. Didn't want to bury the truth, too. That night, a special broadcast aired nationwide, a replay of the leaked recording, intercut with interviews, footage of Caleb's old unit, and official statements from the Department of Defense. Viewers sat glued to their screens, retirees, veterans, families of soldiers. Each face told the same story. Pain, disbelief, pride. For many, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a reckoning for a system that had traded lives for power. In a small living room hundreds of miles away, Evelyn Whitmore sat alone, clutching her son's dog tags, the same ones Caleb had returned to her days before. The TV light flickered across her face as Ethan's voice played once more. "If one day the truth comes out, don't be angry for me. Be grateful, because it means the silence finally broke." She pressed the tags to her chest and whispered, "It broke, baby. It finally broke." The next morning, Caleb stood at the cemetery. The air was still, the kind that holds both sorrow and peace. He knelt at a headstone etched with a name long scrubbed from reports, Ethan Whitmore. He set a small, folded American flag beside the stone and laid his hand on the cold granite. "They can take down their empires," he murmured, "but they'll never rebuild what they broke inside good men like you." Behind him, the sound of footsteps. Evelyn Whitmore, wrapped in a long coat, holding a single white rose. She didn't speak at first, just knelt beside him, placing the rose beside the flag. When she finally did, her voice was soft but clear. "Thank you for giving me my son back, even if it was just his truth." Caleb nodded, eyes misted. He deserved to be heard. They sat in silence, two parents of the fallen, one by blood, one by bond, as the wind moved gently through the trees. Weeks passed. The frenzy died down. The reporters moved on to newer scandals, fresher chaos. But in Crestfield, the air felt different now, lighter somehow. The diner reopened under new management. The same coffee smelled sweeter. The same sunrise looked gentler. Caleb Warren stayed. He could have left once the investigation wrapped, once the headlines faded and the FBI packed up their cases. But something about this quiet town, this crossroads between pain and redemption, held him. The garage still stood on the edge of town, its old Warren Auto sign sun-faded but proud. He reopened it, one bolt and wrench at a time, and slowly, the people who once looked at him with suspicion started stopping by, not out of pity, but respect. "Morning, Sergeant," they'd say. He'd smile, shake his head. Just Caleb now. One Saturday morning, a familiar figure stepped into the shop. It was Evelyn Whitmore. She looked softer than before, not broken, but mended in a quiet way. In her hands was a small box, wrapped in plain brown paper. "I wanted you to have this," she said, placing it gently on the workbench. Caleb opened it. Inside lay a silver pocket watch, old and worn, engraved with the initials EW. "It was Ethan's," she said softly. "He gave it to his father before deployment. Richard, he left it for you in his final statement." Caleb looked up, startled. "His final?" Evelyn nodded. "He took a plea deal and, before sentencing, he told the court you were the man his son trusted most. He said you reminded him of who he used to be, before power made him forget." Caleb stared at the watch for a long moment, then closed it gently and nodded. "Maybe this time," he said quietly. "The right man's keeping time for him." Evelyn smiled through her tears. "I think he'd like that." As spring turned to summer, something remarkable happened. Crestfield began to rebuild, not through money or politics, but through people. A scholarship fund in Ethan's name was established by veterans across the state. The diner began offering free meals for servicemen and women every Sunday. And in the town square next to the old flagpole, they raised a simple bronze plaque, in honor of those who served truth above all. Dedicated to Sergeant Caleb Warren and Specialist Ethan Whitmore, the unveiling drew nearly the whole town. Caleb stood at the edge of the crowd, hat in hand, unsure how to stand in the light after so many years in the shadows. Miss Sharma, the town's new administrator, took the podium. Her voice carried over the breeze. "Some heroes fight with weapons, others fight with truth, and some fight with faith. That the world still remembers what honor means." The crowd applauded softly. Caleb's throat tightened as he looked at the faces, ordinary people, who'd learned something extraordinary. That goodness doesn't always come dressed in power, and that sometimes the smallest acts of courage rewrite the biggest wrongs. Later that evening, he drove out to the Overlook, the same spot where he'd sat the night the story broke. The sun dipped low, casting a copper glow over the valley. He took out the pocket watch, flicked it open, and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, the ticking didn't sound like loss. It sounded like peace. He pulled out his phone, opened a message draft he'd never had the courage to send, to Ethan's military email, long deactivated. He typed slowly, his hands steady. "Your words reached them, brother. The truth's out now. Rest easy. We finished what you started." He hit send. The message, of course, went nowhere. But somehow that didn't matter. The wind moved through the grass like a whisper, soft, warm, carrying the memory of a promise kept. As the screen fades to black, the narrator's voice for your YouTube video would come in, calm, reverent, and faith-filled. Sometimes, the loudest justice doesn't come from shouting. It comes from standing still, holding on to what's right, and letting the truth speak for itself. If this story reminded you that integrity still matters, share it, because somewhere out there, another heart needs to hear it. If this story reminded you that dignity doesn't need wealth, it just needs truth, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next story of faith, justice, and redemption. Have you ever seen someone looked down on only to rise higher than anyone expected? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire our next powerful tale of courage that refuses to stay silent. And for those who love to catch the hidden moments, here's a challenge. Around minute 7:58, when Evelyn places that small box on Caleb's workbench, there's a subtle detail that reveals she already knew who he was long before the trial. Watch closely. It's in the way her fingers linger on the lid before she lets go. Because in this town, like in life, the smallest gesture can expose the biggest truth.